of the pelvic cavity. First, we'll look at two muscles which form part of the wall of the pelvic cavity, piriformis and obturator internus. Then, we'll look at the complex sheet of muscles, collectively called the pelvic diaphragm, which form the floor of the pelvic cavity. We'll look at these structures first in a male specimen. Piriformis and obturator internus are both hip rotator muscles, which arise within the pelvis and pass outward through the sciatic foramina. Here's piriformis. Piriformis arises from here on the sacrum. It passes laterally and leaves the pelvis through the greater sciatic foramen. We'll see where it goes in a minute. Next, we'll add obturator internus to the picture. Obturator internus arises from the obturator membrane and from this wide area around it. Obturator internus leaves the pelvis through the lesser sciatic foramen. In doing so, it makes a 90-degree turn around the lower part of the ischium. Piriformis and obturator internus pass laterally to insert on the greater trochanter of the femur. Their actions as lateral hip rotators are shown in Volume 2 of this atlas. In this section, we're concerned to understand these two muscles simply as parts of the wall of the pelvic cavity. The obturator internus muscle is covered on the inside by this layer of pelvic fascia. There's an important line of thickening in the fascia called the tendinous arch. The tendinous arch goes from the body of the pubis to the ischial spine. We'll see why the tendinous arch is important in a moment. Now, we'll move on to look at the muscles of the pelvic diaphragm. These muscles form a sling which closes off the inferior pelvic aperture and supports the organs that lie within the pelvic cavity. On each side, the pelvic diaphragm is formed by two most unequal muscles, the small coccygeus muscle behind and the much larger and more important levator ani muscle in front. Here's the coccygeus muscle. It runs from the ischial spine to the edge of the lower sacrum and coccyx. Coccygeus is a vestigial muscle with no demonstrable function. Now we'll add the levator ani muscle to the picture. Here's the levator ani. The levator ani has a line of origin that's partly bone and partly fascia. In front, it arises from the body of the pubis. Behind, it arises from the ischial spine. Between these two bony origins, it arises from the tendinous arch in the fascia that overlies obturator internus. The fibers of levator ani pass downwards, backwards, and medially to meet in the midline with those of the opposite side, as we'll see shortly. Let's go round to the back to see the underside of levator ani. Here's the ischial tuberosity. Here's the sacrotuberous ligament. The space between these structures and the underside of the levator ani is called the ischiorectal fossa. In the living body, it's filled with fat. The levator ani is described as having a number of parts, which are named as though they were separate muscles. Unfortunately, the names of these parts are somewhat irrational. This part of levator ani is known as iliococcygeus. Iliococcygeus is very thin. This part is pubococcygeus. It's much more substantial. Pubococcygeus is subdivided further in ways that we won't go into. Now that we've looked at one levator ani muscle, let's look at the two of them together. We're looking from above. Here's the upper part of obturator internus. Here's the tendinous arch.